about this exhibition. We're joined by the Curator of Social History, Matthew Richardson. And Matthew, you were telling us just before we came on air that this exhibition was, what, 3 years in the making?
Yeah, it's 3 years in the planning, 3 years in the construction. And I must emphasise as well, it's not a temporary exhibition, this is a permanent gallery. This is the first new permanent gallery that we've opened at the Manx Museum in something like 10 years. So it's a big investment for us, you know, in terms of staff time, in terms of funding and things like that. So it's a major plank in the museum's programme for this year. But it's been very much driven by the fact that we've had a couple of exhibitions in recent years, notably the Trafalgar exhibition in 2005 and the First World War exhibition in 2014, both of which were extremely popular, extremely well received. And this led our trustees and our management to the conclusion that this was something that really should be featured in a permanent way in the gallery. So that's why we've been leading up towards opening this gallery in time for the 100th anniversary of the armistice this month.
Well, as I say, I mean, it spans 250 years of history, but we're going to focus largely this afternoon on the First and Second World War. Let's take a walk through here. Can you point out some of the things that are most significant to you?
Yeah, I mean, this gallery, although it's referred to in shorthand as a military gallery, it's not all about soldiers on battlefields, it's not all about military uniforms. What we're trying to do here is reflect the fact that war affects all people in society, men, women and children equally. And in this particular display case here, which is about the First World War on the battlefields, one of the most poignant objects that we've got, and one of the things that attracts most attention, is a small lock of a little girl's hair. This little girl, Adelaide Gilmore, sent some pressed flowers and a lock of her hair to her father, who was serving in the trenches in 1916, and he carried these in his wallet with him for 2 years on the Western Front. And it's one of the most emotive things that we've got in the gallery.
And what happened to him?
He did survive. He certainly came home from the war. Whether he was affected by it, we'll never know, you know, as so many men were. He went through that for 2 years on the Western Front. I can't imagine that he came home unchanged by it.
And you get a real sense then of how it affected the people who were left behind at home.
Absolutely. And in this gallery, we look at the home front in the First World War, the way that women were affected. Women's lives were very much sort of turned upside down on the Isle of Man by the First World War, because many of them were involved in the boarding house industry, the visiting trade. That completely collapsed during the First World War. Many of them were out of work in extreme hardship. So a number of war industries grew up to cater for these people, to provide work for them. They were making socks and other things for the army. And of course, many Manx women went away to work in munition factories during the First World War. And we have in one of our cases over here a munitions uniform that was worn by Alice Gibb of the Grove, one of the two Gibb sisters. And she went to Chilwell, a very large munitions factory near Nottingham, which was known as the VC factory because it had this enormous explosion when many of the workers were killed, and a politician referred to it as so brave it should be awarded the VC, this factory. So, you know, this underlines the fact that women on the home front were exposed to just as much danger in their own way as were the men.
Do you know, there's some absolutely extraordinary objects in here, Matthew. Where on earth do you get them from? How do they come to you?
Well, I mean, this don't forget that the Manx Museum has been around a long time. Many of our important objects were very foresighted in collecting the items that they did, and items that we've got on Napoleonic uniforms, particularly the Quilliam, John Quilliam from Trafalgar, that came to us in 1905. So, you know, it's been a long evolution and a long process of building these collections.
And that uniform in itself is remarkable, isn't it? I think, is it just recently been discovered that there was some blood
that's
in the
right,
uniform?
That's right,
Tell us a little bit about
well,
that.
as part of the 3-year build-up to opening the gallery, we did a thorough assessment of all of the objects we were planning to use, trying to establish what conservation treatment they needed. And one of the things that stood out to us was that the Napoleonic uniforms are hugely important and needed very special care. You know, they're 200 odd years old. They need special treatment. So they were sent away to a specialist conservation facility in Cheshire, where they were cleaned, damage was repaired, and in the process they were studied as well. And one of the most amazing things that came out of that was that the Quilliam uniform actually has bloodstains in it, and the bloodstains correspond to damage, battle damage, in the back of the uniform. So whereas we'd always believed that the uniform might have been at Trafalgar, but you know, that's always been said about it, but you take it with a bit of pinch of salt. What's extraordinary now is it's looking at that is actually quite possibly true. And if this is a uniform that's worn at Trafalgar, that sort of propels it into the stratosphere in terms of its significance, because you can count the number of Trafalgar uniforms on the fingers of one hand. So that's an extraordinary discovery.
There are just so many things to look at here, but something, Matthew, which really struck me when I walked past it was this cross from a battlefield grave. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, well, this is a remarkable survivor, really, because as the First World War was in progress and soldiers were being killed, They were generally buried by their comrades on the battlefield where they fell. And grave registration units would come along and put up these temporary wooden markers just to mark the spot where these men were killed. And some of them were actually destroyed during the war. I mean, the German soldiers tended to use British crosses for firewood. So, you know, it's lucky that it survived the First World War. Then, when the Commonwealth War Graves came along in the 20s and 30s and constructed the cemeteries, this particular soldier, his grave was moved into one of the bigger cemeteries that were being built in Belgium at the time, and then the family, if they so wished, could claim the wooden cross. And this particular family on the Isle of Man did claim their cross. It came back to them, and then amazingly it has survived the next sort of 90 or so years in a shed, and it's sort of survived various house moves and things like that, and a woodworm and all the other perils that might have befallen it. And it came to light in 2014 when we did the First World War exhibition. A family contacted us, said they'd got some medals from a relative that was killed. And oh, by the way, we've also got his cross from his grave. You know, and when you hear that, the sort of hairs on the back of your neck stand up, because these things are so rare. I think in terms of the British Isles, they're in the low hundreds. That's how many survive from the many thousands that there must have been.
What's it like for you as somebody who's been immersed in this for the past 3 years and realising just what an impact both World Wars had on the Isle of Man?
Well, one of the things that strikes me is you never sort of stop uncovering these extraordinary stories, you know, and one of the areas that we were quite well off for the early period, you know, the Napoleonic Wars, and we'd done quite well in terms of documenting the First World War in 2014, but we didn't have an awful lot on the post-Second World War era, the modern conflicts that have taken place in the last sort of 40 years or so. So we started looking around for people that had been involved in those conflicts. And again, it was astonishing, the stories that came about. You know, I spoke to a gentleman that was in Korea that still had some of the propaganda leaflets that they dropped on the Chinese lines. We were in touch with a family whose son was a pilot who was killed in the Gulf War, very kindly lent us his medal and a plaque that he was given by the Kuwaiti government. And then another gentleman who was in Afghanistan and took out a Manx flag out there with him and sewed on all the patches of the different units that he encountered at Kandahar Air Base. So fascinating stories from the modern era.
Well, Matthew, this gallery is now here. It's going to stay here. When can people come and see it?
Anytime. We're open 10 till 5, 7 days a week. So it's completely free admission. Come down and have a look.
I should say as well, you're talking about sort of all this wonderful and very old objects and memorabilia, but also there is a very modern, up-to-date, interactive element to the exhibition as well.
Yeah, we always want to give people the chance to explore more. And you know, the objects that we put on display are only one part of the story. We can't tell everything through panels on the wall. It just wouldn't be feasible. So if people want to explore more, if they want to delve more deeply, we've developed a touchscreen interactive where you can search by era, whatever your interest is really, whether you're interested in a particular era, whether you're interested in a particular topic, and we've got things like women at war, children at war. You can explore these stories at your own pace and in your own way.
Matthew, for the moment, thank you so much.